All right, how's it going, everyone? This is Jordan Ring Sakabe from St. Luke's Atelier. Thanks for joining me today. It's a pleasure having you. I am, like I said, Jordan, owner of Ring Sakabe Fine Art. And if you love beauty, truth, and goodness in art, and want to support the growth and revival of traditional Christian art, then hit that subscribe button and don't forget to like this video. Today, I'm going to talk about why God is so often depicted as an old white man in sacred art and why you shouldn't worry about it too much. This can be a touchy subject for some people, and I'd never strive to assert my own opinions or will above God's, so I pray and ask that you also pray for me, and that together we'll be able to understand His will and understand something about art and God and how all of that relates to truth, beauty, and goodness. But before that, I have one exciting announcement. I just got my portrait of Saint Mary Magdalene back here entitled Illuminated by Grace, Portrait of the Madeleine, all framed, and I love it. I am so excited to share this with all of you. In this painting, I've decided to portray her bathed in the redemptive light of God's truth, goodness, and mercy as it pierces through the darkness, representing the transformative power of God's divine love and redemption, the one that she, Mary Magdalene, experienced as she was, an individual who had been possessed by 7 demons or, completely possessed. And having encountered Christ and becoming completely redeemed, you can see in the painting that encircling her head, she has a halo that symbolizes her complete redemption and is a testament to the totality of her salvation through Christ. And yeah, I'm just really excited to have it all framed and ready to send off to various events and exhibitions. It is available for sale as well. And later on, I'm going to also have some prints available for purchase on my website at www.ringsakabefineart.com. So if you'd like to purchase the original or just have a copy of this piece, or perhaps you just want to, check out some of my other works of art, you can do all of that if you head on over to ringsakabefineart.com and check out what's going on over there. Now, let's get back to the issue at hand. So, is it problematic that in a lot of works of art, God is portrayed as an old white man with a beard reclining in the heavens? As I'm speaking, I'm hoping that you'll imagine Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, where you see a lot of skin, clouds, and a beautiful artistic representation of divine and angelic beings and the creation of the first human being. And yeah, I'm going to argue that this kind of art is actually not problematic, but rather is an essential voice in the conversation that informs our understanding of the nature of God. And I want to support this contention with 3 key points. The first of which is this: regardless of the artist's intentions, all art is a metaphor. All right? Art is a symbol communicating something about reality. And just like other metaphors and parables, it captures one or maybe more facets or characteristics of what it intends to portray, but it will never be an exhaustive expression of that thing, and that's okay. My second point is this: we have to consider the historical context of the artists and the limitations that they faced. By understanding the era and the constraints under which these works were created, we can appreciate the depictions without imposing modern standards and expectations. Third and finally, in the marketplace of ideas, we often need imperfect examples to help us grasp what is incomplete about the material world and where the inexpressible realities of God begin. Now, I want to set the stage a little more here. You may be one individual thinking, hey man, is this really all that important of an issue? Like, does anyone really have an issue with drawing white Jesus pictures? To which I'd say, yes, it is important. And yes, there have been thousands, even millions of people who have an issue with even just depicting God in art, regardless of, what race he is or like how you depict him. In fact, there are even mainstream religions such as Islam, which flat out forbid it. So now bringing it back to our Judeo-Christian context, the debate looks slightly different than, say, in Islam. And that's because in the 10 Commandments, specifically, Exodus chapter 20, verses 4 and 5, God commands, "You shall not make for yourself an graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. All right, this commandment, read without any context, in the modern period, seems to be a pretty obvious condemnation of all biblical paintings, sacred art, and icons, right? Well, now to make the waters even more muddy, just keep reading in the Old Testament, and it will reveal that the Holy Ark of the Covenant, as well as the Temple of Solomon, was filled with depictions of both earthly and heavenly beings, in apparent contradiction with the Ten Commandments. So in other words, this is the situation we have here, all right? The same prophet who gave us the Ten Commandments also gave us an ark with 2 seraphim gilded in gold on the top. What gives? Let's dive into my first point, which is this. All art is a metaphor and a symbol for communicating something about reality. What do I mean? Basically, that if I paint a picture of Peter, and let's say it's the musician Peter Gabriel, because that's a super cool and Christian name, I guess. Anyways, even if I paint a highly realistic and convincing picture of Peter Gabriel, neither the pigments nor linseed oil in my oil paint, nor the canvas it's painted on, not even the stretcher bars that pull the canvas tight, is the real Peter. The painting fails to capture his essential substance. It's just a symbol, a depiction of Peter, the real Peter. And the real substance of who Peter is somewhere in, the guy, wherever he is. I don't know where he lives. It's probably better that I don't know where he lives and accidentally say it online, right? In other words, the painting is just a symbol of Peter, not to be confused with the human Peter. Now, chances are you probably haven't heard a painting itself, right, get called a symbol. More likely than not, you've looked at, symbols that were contained in a painting and discussed, the symbolic nature of that thing, right? So I want to define terms here a little bit. Specifically, what does it mean to be a symbol? Well, when I say symbol, I merely mean that there is something concrete or abstract that exists in reality, and we are attempting to portray it in a representative or anaphoric manner, and that the thing we use to do that is a symbol. So let's give an example. I may have a dog, but if I want to talk about the dog, I need a way of formulating sounds with my mouth and lungs and voice that can be interpreted as meaning, mankind's canine friend. And those sounds are the symbol for dog in this situation. Let's look at another example. This might kind of be overdoing it, but I want to demonstrate this with another example. Let's say I have a friend named Michael, which I actually do have a friend named Michael. And, Michael, if you're watching this video, please leave a comment saying, "Hey, everyone, it's me, Michael. I'm the real Michael." Anyways, let's pretend that there's now a test subject and we got Michael and them in the room. So I introduce my friend Michael to this test subject. Now that they are acquainted, I get a piece of paper and I write Michael's name down on this piece of paper. Now, imagine I show that piece of paper with the name Michael written on it alongside my actual friend Michael to the test subject and ask them, "Hey, I want you to point to Michael." What do you think will happen? Do you think that they will point to the paper on the left with the word Michael written on it, or will they point to the person on the right named Michael? Now, let's imagine also that the test subject is an English speaker and they don't know Mandarin, but I wrote Michael's name using Mandarin. Who do you think that they're going to point to now? Well, clearly, they're going to point to the human and not the paper. Now, why do you suppose that is? Surely it would be odd if the test subject thought the written name was more of a Michael or had more of a Michael-y substance than the actual person named Michael sitting in front of them. That's all because distinguishing between a representation and the actual person is pretty straightforward in this situation, right? However, things become a little more complex when the actual person or subject is God, and the representation isn't language, as in speaking and writing, but is a visual artistic representation. In other words, things get weird when the person is God and the language is art. Let's focus on God here first, shall we? We first have to stop taking for granted the fact that we can call God God. You might not realize this, but in the Judeo-Christian tradition, there has been centuries of debate about the best way to refer to God in a linguistic manner. And aligning the letters in English, G-O-D, in a sequential manner is a relatively recent-ish thing we English-speaking Christians enjoy. And we see this when we reflect back on our background as Judeo-Christians and note the complexity of terms surrounding God. If you go through the Old Testament in Hebrew, not that I do because I actually don't know Hebrew, but I have good enough reason to trust those who do. If you do that, you will encounter the Tetragrammaton, which, if you're not familiar with that, is the transliterated letters YHWH that you sometimes see. And in English, we typically pronounce this as Yahweh. This is the most sacred name of God, consisting of the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vav, and He. It comes from the verb to be in Hebrew, and it was the word God used to identify himself when he revealed himself to Moses in the account of the burning bush. Both in tradition and in modern times, especially in the Jewish world, this name has been considered too holy to be spoken aloud. Instead, Jews traditionally substitute it with Adonai, meaning Lord, when reading scripture. Alternative names for God from the Hebrew Bible, such as Elohim, El Shaddai, and Adonai, are used in different contexts, each reflecting different aspects of God's nature and his relationship with the world. Out of respect, many Jews write G-D instead of G-O-D to avoid casually writing the divine name. In everyday conversation, Jews might use terms like Hashem, which literally means the name, to refer to God without using sacred names. In prayers and blessings, the names of God are used with great reverence, following specific guidelines to ensure their proper use. So these difficulties that we experience of trying to refer to God in language just show the fact that we've engaged in a multi-millennia long process of attempting to balance the use of representational signs and symbols for referring to God while avoiding limiting him by confining him into a conceptual box. So to illustrate this point a little further, consider this. The challenge of referring to God without placing limitations upon him extends to the very pronouns we use for God. We typically say he and him in English. But in the Catholic tradition, we understand that God is not limited to a merely masculine expression of a human person. God is beyond gender, and we use masculine pronouns to refer to God because he is presented to us as a tripersonal and monosubstantial entity with two obvious male associations in God the Father and God the Son. In other words, we reference God according to the manner in which he has revealed himself in the Father and the Son, and this constitutes the cause of our use of he, him pronouns. But we also understand that God is life and being itself. And whereas, here on earth, the creation of new life is impossible without a male-female interaction, for God, nothing is impossible, and God is capable of acting beyond our natural laws, even if we refer to him only with the he, him pronouns. Inevitably, that last paragraph, talking about pronouns, and God just about got everyone worked up. And if that's how cuckoo things can get when we're just trying to figure out how to properly refer to God in language, then can you now appreciate or imagine just how weirder it gets when we're talking about how to refer to God in art? So, what happens when it comes to art? Well, history has shown that the challenges become even more pronounced. For literally thousands of years, artists, craftsmen, historians, and the like have grappled with even the most basic of questions, such as, what color should I paint God? How old should God be? How long is God's hair and beard? Does he have one? And what is God wearing? Is it even okay to portray God at all? With a more nuanced understanding of the commandment provided to Moses, namely that You shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above or that is on the earth beneath. And I'm going to just keep it to that, as I've already quoted this commandment before. We can see that God here employs the means of divine command to help keep the Israelites from falling into idolatry, which was common among surrounding pagan cultures in that time specifically, and even now. The focus was on worshiping the one true God, right, with that commandment, without reducing God to a physical representation that could lead to idolatrous practices. We understand this as a doctrinal command, one that has a specific scope and purpose based on the principle that we should have no gods other than the one true and only God. However, a failure to recognize the role art and craftsmanship played even in the Old Testament times, namely in the construction of holy places of worship, such as Solomon's temple, and in the Ark of the Covenant, like when you don't recognize these things, you get a crazy situation where both in modernity and in history, we've encountered something known as iconoclasm. And if you've never heard of iconoclasm before, this basically refers to the rejection or destruction of religious images or icons. There were two significant periods of iconoclasm in Christian history. First is the Byzantine iconoclasm that occurred during the 8th and 9th centuries in the Byzantine Empire, where there was a movement against the veneration of icons. Iconoclasts believed that the use of images in worship could lead to idolatry, and they were very against the commandment, and believed that it was in the commandments to not depict God at all. And so, because of this, many monks and believers were persecuted, exiled, and even executed for their beliefs. Not to mention significant artworks and cultural heritage were lost due to the systematic destruction of icons and religious works of art. Later, there was also the Reformation iconoclasm, which happened in the 16th century and even a little bit into the 17th century, when many reformers destroyed religious images and statues in churches, again citing concerns over idolatry and a return to what they saw as a pure form of worship. And now, in the modern times, there's a new form of iconoclasm, which I personally am convinced is more destructive, and whose influence grows by the day. It can be readily identified in the culture that has emerged out of the far left ideology that strives to put limits on people's speech, actions, and beliefs. This iconoclasm is motivated by the Marxist illusion of a need for a class struggle to abolish all images and symbols that stem from supposed oppressors and their institutions, that including churches. So this sort of iconoclasm, I believe, is more subvert and dangerous than previous movements, and it is the main proprietor of the view that I'm addressing here today. Now, let's not let all of these details about iconoclastic movements, language, and God distract from the point being made here, which is this. As the sincere individual strives to know God and align their will with the divine will, God will permit us to gradually come to a knowledge of who He is as we are formed in our faith. He doesn't immediately import all of the information we need for our catechesis all at once. So, since we are gradually coming to understand God, sometimes our understanding will be partial and even sometimes just wrong. At various points, we may learn things about God's nature that we later discover were wrong, yet God doesn't smite the sincere seeker of truth for this reason. Rather, as one strives to come to know God more and more, they will inevitably be presented with words, descriptions, metaphors, symbols, language, images, icons, and art that will help them to approximate the truth of God. Now, I like this word, approximate the truth of God, because even as one, has been formed in their faith for decades, there is by no means within that person an exhaustive fullness of the truthfulness of God. These means that we have for coming to know God are by their nature incapable of exhaustively defining God. Because God, we know, is infinite, and His infinite nature is unable to be expressed, right? In the same way that there never has been a man who was able to fully grasp the entirety of the nature of God, there is no perfect sentence, no work of art that can capture all of his glory and goodness. For indeed, it is infinite and by nature ungraspable. So, for this reason, every work of art is a metaphor. And every metaphor and parable, and symbol and the like must be understood in the context of being a limited expression of a limitless being. So, in the same way that we may struggle to express the geography of heaven and may erroneously assume that when we are trying to describe its highness, some people might accidentally express that as a lateral measure of height. You hear atheists, talk about, we've launched rockets into space and, we didn't see God at all as we went up. And that's because, God is going to permit us to imagine his holiness in visual terms like highness or like in a physical geography. And artists might use some of those types of terms to help inform their work. An artist might have something that is bright in their work or something that's massive, light, or golden. And all of those things are only meant to help us approximate the truthfulness of God as opposed to perfectly and exhaustively describe them. So, why is this important? Because if God is going to be patient with us and our gradually developing understanding of his goodness and glory, then ought we not also to extend the same grace and charity to others, especially to those whose work we decorate in our churches and cathedrals because they do so much to help inform our beliefs? If God himself is going to teach us using the limitations of humans and metaphoric language and vocabulary and concepts, then who are we to reject those things and say, yes, well, in that situation in the New Testament, when you use that parable with words and stuff, that was okay. But, all of the sort of artwork and stuff that visually represents you, no, those metaphors and those things, that's not okay. This all leads me now to my second main point, which is this. Once we understand that God does permit us to nurture our understanding of him by means of imperfect language, metaphors, symbols, and artistic portrayals, then we can begin to reflect on the traditional depictions of God in art and see them in their proper historical context and have the grace to understand that the decisions made by the artists of the past, were made in respect to a set of specific limitations. So, in recent times, you see it all over the place, right? There's some activist, there's someone protesting somewhere about like some political figure or some religious figure, often in a colonial like context or a medieval or Renaissance or Baroque period. And this person, because they had sinned or because they had done atrocious things, that all representations of them and, the people who portrayed them, we just need to reevaluate things and maybe get rid of it. So, unfortunately, this cry for the destruction and abolishment of art is something that fails to notice one particularly important aspect about the human experience, and that is we are constantly building upon the mistakes of the past, but if we are going about the process of rewriting the past or censoring the past or pretending like it didn't happen or trying to just get rid of it, then then people in the future will be uninformed about the basis for which to make better and more improved decisions. So, let's put it this way. The thing that the modernist and liberal activist and academic often has forgotten is that artists worked within a specific cultural, economic, and social constraint context, and they were inevitably going to make mistakes, and they were limited to the visual language, culture, and symbols familiar to their audience to convey complex theological ideas. And while these things fail to exhaustively express the fullness of God and God's goodness, they nevertheless have helped lead us to the understanding of God that we enjoy today. So, in the modern era, even in the church, we take for granted how easily we're able to access knowledge and information. But for most of her history, the church has used sacred art for educational and devotional purposes. Religious art served to educate the faithful about the stories and teachings of the Bible, especially in times when literacy rates were low. While it's true these visual representations inevitably emphasize a limited set of God's characteristic, that doesn't negate the fact that they nonetheless help to convey complex theological truths and help to inspire devotion and worship and improve people's lives. Another mistake we often make in the modern era can be found in how easily we take for granted our access to the materials for creating works of art and our access to referential materials and models. An artist today can go online and buy an oil painting set for less than $100 and have every color possible under the sun, a canvas to paint on, and brushes to lead the way, all delivered to his or her doorstep in a week or less time. Now, that level of material availability for the average person wasn't even available 100 years ago. Never mind the fact that anyone with internet access today is able to do an image search on people of various ethnic profiles, which can inform their artwork. That's a huge blessing. Historically, throughout the majority of Europe, you could go a lifetime without encountering a person of foreign heritage. For a person in Europe, if you were in Paris, literally someone from like modern day Germany would have been foreign. So chances of meeting a person of color was so much more rare that you were more likely to find, I don't know, like a bear eating honey in a 100-acre wood out of a ceramic jar than you were to find a person who resembled, maybe a first century Jew who also happened to be available to model for your artwork. Sorry for the Winnie the Pooh reference. I happen to have a 2-year-old, and so we're always thinking about Monsters, Inc. and Winnie the Pooh. Anyways, lastly, my third point is this. Imperfect examples, as all artwork will be, because there is no perfect metaphor or symbol, they're not only fine to have, but we need them. Because through their error, they help us better understand the divine through negation. What does that mean? Well, sometimes it's easier to say what God is not than to say exactly what God is. It's easier to identify a problem rather than conjure up a solution, right? So, I don't know. My mom, she makes peach cobbler. Both my parents do this, I guess. I don't want to leave my dad out. Sorry, Dad, you're included here. I've never made it before, and I don't really know exactly how difficult it is to make a good peach cobbler. But I can say this, that when I eat other people's cobbler, that stuff ain't cobbler. At least it's not made to the same standard as my parents. And similarly, in the marketplace of ideas, negations resulting from identifying imperfect depictions can prompt deeper reflection and help us to identify something more and something even truer about the nature of God. So I can't do a good job of explaining why other people's peach cobbler just isn't quite, for me, the real peach cobbler. But I can, by sort of negating it, express something about what I believe to be the more true peach cobbler. And, these representations, often made through negations, can serve as a starting point that help us to move beyond the material world and contemplate the more, inexpressible realities of God. So for my Protestant friends out there who may not be familiar with Orthodox and Catholic practices, there's an ancient type of devotion I want to bring up here. And you find it within our traditions, and it's known as iconography, or, the veneration of icons. I've mentioned it a little bit previously, or a little bit previously in this discussion. And I'm going to dive into it a little bit more deeply right now. So an icon, in this sense, is a highly stylized work of art that is created in line with a well-defined and constituted set of aesthetic rules for communicating divine truths. So, for example, in the world of iconography, colors have very specific associations. Blue in iconography often symbolizes serenity, stability, inspiration. It's often used when depicting the Blessed Mother. It can be a calming color and also symbolize things like reliability. Blue and red are often used in icons of the Blessed Mother in the motif known as Our Lady of Sorrows. And Our Lady of Sorrows is a very common motif used in iconography that features the Blessed Mother with 7 swords piercing her heart. It's designed to inspire worship and devotion by helping us remember the 7 sorrows that pierced Mary's heart, namely the prophecy that she received from Simeon in the 2nd chapter of Luke, the flight into Egypt that we read about in Matthew chapter 2, the loss of Jesus as a child or pre-adolescent when they were traveling to Jerusalem when he was teaching in the temple and then was discovered 3 days later. You find that also in Luke chapter 2. The 4th sorrow is when Mary meets Jesus on the Via Dolorosa, which we in the tradition call the 4th station of the cross. There's also the crucifixion of Jesus on Mount Calvary for the 5th. The 6th is Jesus' descent from the cross, and then finally the burial of Jesus by Joseph of Arimathea. These 7 different events constitute and remind us, or rather, they constitute the 7 sorrows, which remind us of these important events in the life and the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, icons and images such as these employ things often like gold leaf, which help us to remember the value of the gospel and the value that life with God truly has. And that when we've actually achieved our goal at the end of this earthly experience and after the final judgment, just the kind of grandeur and sort of like the kind of the glorious nature of the beatific vision. These types of visual elements, which you often see like in halos and in the gold leaf surrounding the head of images of saints, are not like intended to say that like, all the saints have, like an aura around their head literally all the time in this manner, and it's made out of gold. Like, it shouldn't be taken literally, but it's meant to indicate and cause one to reflect on something that is more supernatural. God himself, through the overshadowing of the Holy Spirit, created the most important visual representation of goodness and beauty in the incarnation of his only begotten Son, Jesus Christ. In other words, the belief in the incarnation, that God became man in the person of Jesus Christ, God the Son, right? This provides a basis for depicting God in art, as Jesus himself was something that we could visually behold. And for a time, he could be visually, depicted. People at that time had the option to visually describe something about his characteristic, right? So the fact that this becomes then a basis for depicting God in art, I like to demonstrate it in the 3 following ways. First, this is because Jesus, who is God, took on a visible, tangible human form. And in the Catholic tradition, we say Jesus was fully man and fully God. And portraying him in art becomes a way to honor the way that he was fully man and took on humanity while retaining and maintaining his divinity. Second, the incarnation of Christ provides a basis for depicting God as a male human. So God took on the form of a male individual, which allows the artist the ability to begin an exploration of depicting the character of God in art within a male context. Third, it provides a basis for depicting God in art as having inherited a racial profile. But it's an ambiguous one, admittedly. So, as the offspring of the Blessed Virgin Mary, overshadowed by the Holy Spirit, we understand the physical characteristics of Christ, that they would have been consistent with his mother Mary, right? And her ancestors. And while, no image of a Nazarene of the 1st century exists today, artists are nonetheless permitted to approximate and discern to what degree they wish to emphasize this ethnic nature of Christ, as opposed to some of his more abstract qualities. Therefore, without having any photographic evidence to determine precisely all of the ethnic elements possessed by Christ during the 1st century and the time of his life, the artist is nonetheless granted license to do their best to fill in the gaps in a manner that suits their artistic and, catechetical purposes, inasmuch as it does not, in a heretical effort, seek to undermine or discredit dogmatic and doctrinal definitiveness of what we've received through the Bible and through the tradition. So in other words, I might want to express the truthfulness of the love of God by portraying Jesus as a woman. But this would undermine and discredit the dogmatic and doctrinal definitiveness that we've received through the Bible of the fact that Jesus Christ was born as a man. So, how ought we to best interpret an image of the God of the universe that doesn't align with our personal perceptions? Let's say that you're, the kind of person who sees a black Jesus and feels a little bit uncomfortable, or a white Jesus and feels uncomfortable, or just any depiction of Jesus, and all of that sort of doesn't align well with your theology. Well, first, I think we need to keep in mind that first point I made. Qualify your interpretation of all religious art that you encounter by remembering the limited nature of all visual expressions of the divine. Second, keep in mind that the lack of conveniences, as well as the context and limitations under which that the artwork was created, are also going to influence how you interpret it, and it might cause it to feel foreign. But nonetheless, that doesn't negate the good things and the accurate things that the artwork is portraying. Finally, we need to also keep in mind how even bad art, or art that is limited in its ability to express a complicated truth about the divine, still informs our understanding of God. So with that in mind, next time you see a white European artist depict God as an old white man, imagine how this could be understood to reflect perhaps the artist's personal sense of a familial relationship as a son to God the Father. Additionally, it can be understood as the artist's effort to communicate divine attributes, like, maybe the oldness, the age of that depiction of God depicts his attribute of wisdom or authority. And that, using this visual vocabulary, sorry, I'm having a hard time. Visual vocabulary, that's a little bit of a tongue twister. I'm going to say that again. So it can be understood as the artist's effort to communicate the authority of God using the visual vocabulary of his or her time and culture, rather than creating an exhaustive and ethnic definition of the God of the universe. So, if a pasty-looking depiction of God or the Blessed Mother offends you, do not despair. The artist likely had no doubts regarding the level of melanin Mary had. And if witnessing a white Madonna and child wobbles your wits, you need not wail for her, for she has herself proven in the apparitions of Guadalupe, Donglu, Kibeho, Lourdes, and Akita that her melanin is as malleable as molding clay. Now, what should a person with such criticisms do? Well, if anything, just keep in mind that you do not personally need to identify with each work of religious art that you encounter. If one work suits your tastes, but another doesn't, strive to understand it in the context within which it was created, and if you still don't get much out of it, move on. Set it aside. Don't let your preferences become a hindrance for someone else, and if you particularly feel disturbed or scandalized, then you should sense maybe a call to create works of art yourself. It's easy enough to mock or deride the art of another person, so why not actually do the impressive thing of painting the art that you want to see yourself? If a Caucasian Jesus makes you or someone else feel disenfranchised or uncomfortable, then portray Jesus in the manner that speaks best to your soul. Trying to remove or censor classical images of Christ or God to help affirm people of color is about as useful as complaining to Leonardo da Vinci that there should be more Polynesian depictions of Jesus. What good would that do? He's already dead. Additionally, if you're the kind of person that feels like you should get rid of, William Bouguereau's masterpiece, The Innocents, because it's not accurately approximating the ethnic depiction of Mary and Jesus. Well, that's about as helpful as, burning down a library because it doesn't have the book you want to borrow. Instead, maybe you should pick up a brush and get to the work of painting Mary and Jesus in the ethnicity that you feel is most accurate, and then share it with the world. There is totally enough space for you to do your work, and I guarantee you, people are going to love it. The dead artists and authors who have entrusted their legacy to the living are looking to us to carry the baton and create works of our own to help, continue this awesome work of helping bring the gospel to as many people as possible through art. So if you happen to be a person, especially a Christian, who feels, contented to just mock these works of art and insult the people in the grave, you and your insults will be lost to time when you could have been spending your energy and efforts in developing and creating things that actually could have, lasted for centuries and even millennia. So doing so only invalidates your claims and demonstrates a lack of sincerity in addressing the issues that you perceive, and it fails to actually help serve those that need your efforts. So let's go ahead and wrap things up here. While some individuals feel the classic depictions of God to be unpalatable for their ethnic depictions, and may even at times use the 10 Commandments warning against idolatry as sort of a proof text against sacred art and all depictions of God, the modern Christian can remain secured in their knowledge that portraying God in art is a meaningful expression of faith grounded in the theological significance of the incarnation and can be used for educational and devotional purposes with symbolic representation, and it's all in line with a long-standing Christian tradition. So next time you see God portrayed as a particular race, avoid the small-minded assumption that the artist is attempting to make a definitive declaration of divinity. Rather, remember, it is just an invitation to explore deeper truths about God. Consider the artist's limitations, budget constraints, cultural context, and learn to consume art in good faith. In conclusion, God depicted as an old white man in sacred art is not a problem when we understand that all art is a metaphor and recognize the historical context of the artists that created it and accept the necessity of imperfect representations for grasping divine truths. All art is a parable, useful for teaching certain things about God's character, but not intended as a definitive expression of who God is. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I had a lot of fun writing this and presenting it to you. And if you found this video insightful or helpful in any way, please let me know in the comments. I'm excited to see, what helped, and I'm excited to see where, you might object. If you feel like you've found something that I need to give further consideration, please, in good faith, let me know. I'm more than happy to read a criticism presented in good faith and in charity. And I think that everyone benefits from that kind of discussion. So let's continue to explore the beautiful, true, and good in art together. And I can't wait to see you in our next video together. Take care. God bless.